important chapter. So I want to really take it slow. And that's why even by the third week of September, we'll probably still be talking about these macro statistics, right? So what do macroeconomists study? Well, a lot, right? While some countries have experienced rapid growth, others have stayed mired in poverty. Why are there high rates of inflation while others don't? Why do countries experience recessions or depressions? And how can government reduce the frequency and severity of these episodes? So macroeconomics is the study of the economy as a whole, and it's very important to then understand what are the statistics that macroeconomists calculate, estimate, and then analyze. Okay. A little note here as well that the macroeconomy, since it's so important and it affects everyone, it is central to public policy debates, and it's central to the actual policies that we expect politicians to have. And it's important also that the large government agencies that are in charge of Philippine government policy is definitely has a firm understanding of macroeconomic policy, such as the BSP. Our next topic here is the historical performance of the US economy. But like we said, this class is supposed to be on the Philippines. However, I will take my inspiration from the slides, not the slides, from the figures here in chapter 1 to highlight the Philippine versions of these graphs. All right. So the first thing we'll see here is a graph of what's called real GDP. And real GDP, and we'll get to this in a moment, measures the total income of everyone in the economy. Okay. So this is real GDP per person. Okay. And real GDP captures the total income of everyone, and real GDP per person measures the income of the average person of the economy. Okay. So what we've done here is to show a long time series of the US GDP per capita in fixed $2,000, right? And over time, what do you see? There are moments where it's going down, and there are moments where it's going up. Okay, so these are what's called business cycles. Okay, so that's very important to notice that in the United States, you'll have these periods of going up and going down with some regularity. What I also wanted to make sure that everyone understood is look at the y-axis here. So notice that the gaps between the numbers are not even, right? So this is 8,000, and this is definitely more than twice. This is 16,000, right? This is 8,000. Okay. So the gaps between the numbers are uneven. And the reason is because they wanted to present it in a log change, right? This is, take note of the note here. Real GDP is plotted here on a log scale. On this scale, equal distances on the vertical axis represent equal percentage changes. Okay. So the differences between points here in the y-axis represent not absolute changes in dollars, but percentage changes in dollars. So you might notice something very fishy or funny about the y-axis because it's in log scale. Okay. So an example here would be the distance between 4,000 and 8,000, a 100% change. This one to this one, okay, is the same as the distance between 8,000 and 16,000 because this is also a 100% change. Okay, so in terms of percentage change, you can read the y-axis in terms of percentage change. The next statistic that will be featured in chapter 1 and chapter 2 is the inflation rate. So what's interesting about the United States is that there have been multiple instances where you have deflation or negative inflation rates. Here, 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 here. Mostly in the pre-World War II period. Okay. And then the final rate of deflation is really, well, really more like here in before the 1950s. After the 1950s, inflation in the United States has been large, all positive, but still there are instances of increasing inflation and periods where inflation is falling. Okay. Here's our next chart, which is the unemployment rate. Now, the unemployment rate measures the percentage of people in the labor force who do not have jobs. This one tends to move a lot, around a lot, okay, with the highest here in the history of the United States in the Great Depression. Although this time series does not include the COVID shock, because that will happen here. So this is a fairly old textbook, which still has not incorporated that. And it's going to go up and go down, go up and go down. So this is supposed to represent the business cycle in the United States. All right. So those are the three statistics that will feature heavily in the first two chapters. Before moving forward with chapter 1, I would like to return to the Philippines. Okay. So what I've done, everyone, is to go to OpenStat. And again, this is part of your homework. So I invite you to go to OpenStat and download. On the other hand, I also have the data. You may also freely use the data that I've posted at Ovle. But even though you use the one that I've posted in Ovle, please also explore the OpenStat database, because as students in economics, you'll probably be visiting this one a lot. So start becoming comfortable with it. Next is after having downloaded it, okay, and here's an example of some of it. Okay, so this is an example where GDP, for instance, can be cut up into the different expenditure components. That's not for right now, so I'm gonna close that. And here's an example of something that can be downloaded. I've changed the file name. But other than that, this basically comes from OpenStat when I look for unemployment rates. Okay, and in the Philippines, there are these different unemployment-related statistics called labor force participation, the employment rate, the unemployment rate, and the underemployment rate. All right. So we will defer the explanation of all of these statistics to a later video. Okay. But for now, I just wanted to point out that you can get this in OpenStat. Now, what I've done here is I'm trying to now use R, right? So R is an open source software that you can use to analyze data. You can use R in your homework if you wish. You can use R for for this particular homework, because I will be uploading this code um, onto onto our Ooblet, so you can use it. There, you don't have to, but hopefully you'll also spend some time using or upgrading into R during this course, at least this year, so you can tool up so that by the time third year or fourth year rolls around, you will have some working knowledge of some open source software that you can use to manipulate data and do some statistics on it. Okay. So now let's continue to do this. So first you need to import your packages. And then you start importing your data. So what we've done here is I have unemployment, and this seems to be the longest unemployment time series that we have from 2005 to 2023. Next is we have nominal and real GDP. I'm going to call it our GDP here, but this GDP has both nominal and real. Don't worry if the concepts are not clear yet, but basically there are two kinds of GDP that you can get, right? This is also at an annual frequency, and you can get it at a more frequent frequency than that. I think the most is quarterly. And then you will then import this GDP This GDP data comes straight from OpenStat. So after getting it into R, you need to manipulate it. So why not just show you a little bit? Okay, so let's start with unemployment. And this is the same unemployment file that I showed you earlier, and I'm calling it unemp. And if you look here, this is exactly the same as the Excel file that I showed you earlier. This first column are the different years, and these columns are the different statistics. The second column is basically useless. It just tells you what kind of data it is. It's annual data. So I have written up this code to clean this up. After running this, okay, let's take a look at it again. All right, and there we have our data for unemployment, employment, labor force participation, and underemployment in a way that you can use in Stata. Or no, not Stata, in R, I should say. Although you can also use this in Stata. Next, here is our GDP data. And I will also show you what that looks like. This is basically from OpenStat. No, the only thing that I did to make my life a little easier is to move the real GDP breakdown from the right-hand side to down here. So I just copy pasted it here. But other than that, this looks exactly the same as the one you would get from OpenStat. Similarly, we will fix it. And this is what it will look like after fixing it. It will have a lot of rows, and the first set of rows comes as gross domestic product, which is the nominal one, and the other one will be real gross domestic product. Note that we start in 1946, which is officially from OpenStat is the earliest year you can get data, which is post World War II. So we don't have a lot of, what's this one? Let's go back to ManQ. We don't have a lot of this, right? The Great Depression. We don't have statistics based off the Great Depression. Our statistics are after basically liberation, after World War II. Next is we have inflation. For some reason in inflation, there is a 2005 to 2017, and then further from 2018 to 2023. It's unknown why they wanted to separate it. There's also an interesting thing here. So wait, let me first show you what the main data looks like. And this is basically comes from the OpenStat itself. So these are year-on-year changes in the CPI, which are average inflation rates. So after including that and running as well, the update here, there's an update. I put it together. And now I have data from 1995 to 20 more than 2024. So it ends in 2024. Although, of course, since this year is still 2024, 2024 is actually still blank or not available. So now let's do some plotting in order, again, where we've imported all of this data to basically show you a version of figure 1-1, a figure of 1-2, a version of figure of 1-2, and figure 1-3, with a caveat that most of our data will be here in the 90s and the 2000s. Okay. So having said that, let's go here. Looking at this, it's a straight shot upwards. It's a fairly, at least at this resolution, it's about a fairly flat line. There's a little, not flat line, I mean a positive slope that is some positive slope, right? But there's a flat region here, which apparently corresponds to the 9/11 terrorist attack. From the 1990s onward, you see basically relatively constant inflation between the 2 to 4% range for the United States. And for unemployment, similarly, there's still this cycle of unemployment, but it's a little less pronounced, and it's roughly equal to an average of 5%. But they're still going down, still going up, still going down. So, okay. So what does the Philippine data look like? So now let's do some plotting. First, let's do unemployment over time. Ah, let me review this one. Let me instead of doing that. All right, there we go. So this is average inflation over time. I will make it bigger. And what we've seen here is that, well, our inflation figures basically are much later than his inflation figures. Our inflation figures go up and down, but we never go to the negative, okay, which is consistent with the US experience in modern times. Second is our inflation rate is falling over time until we hit the mid 2010s. And then there is this major shock that happened here, the COVID shock, which interestingly enough did not really affect inflation as it was happening. But this increase here in inflation since COVID sort of reflects the supply shock and possibly a demand shock after COVID. So this is the pattern of our data, right? Our inflation rate generally has been falling. Okay, we'll be talking about how that happened, and then after COVID, it has shot up here. Our next graph is for real GDP, and here I've also done the scale on log 10. And here are our two plots, two lines, I should say. The nominal gross domestic product or nominal GDP. And then up here is the real GDP. Okay. If you notice here, they're equal in 2018 because 2018 is the base year. So I know all of this is not very clear yet, but it will be clear as the video and the weeks go, right? So what we've got here is the important line to look at is here. And what's interesting here in this long sweep of history since 1940s is that generally there's only been this one that is very clear, right? This one, wherein you had a decrease in real GDP. Okay. And of course, this one, wherein you had a decrease in real GDP here. Okay. So this corresponds to the big recession, possibly even depression, related to the post-Marcos era. And this is the thing that we'll be talking a lot about for the short-run stabilization part of the class, which is our experience, the Philippine experience here, dealing with this recession. Prior to COVID, that has literally been the only recession period, except for the 1990s. It's not very clear here, but there are periods where growth is literally zero or near zero. And finally, we will show you unemployment. And this is first graph is unemployment. So here's unemployment. What's interesting or striking about this is over the years, our unemployment has been falling steadily, similar to inflation. So during the same period, inflation and unemployment has been falling. And then in the COVID shock, it had grown to this level. and unemployment had started falling again afterwards. Even as inflation, again, if you remember the earlier graph, inflation had increased during this period. Okay, so there's different dynamics here. In this period, inflation has been rising. In this period, unemployment has been falling. And that contrasts with the United States. In the United States, you can clearly see the cyclical movement, but in the Philippines, the cyclical movement in unemployment is not very apparent, at least in the annual data. All right, so we will close this video here, and then there will be another, a continuation of this video in a moment. Thank you.